Hey there, I'm Bailey and welcome to my channel where we discuss all the tips and tricks necessary for you to live a life of adventure. In today's video, we're going to discuss the 10 essentials. Now, in case you don't know what that is, those are basically like the basic things that you should take with you on every hike you go on. There's a pretty extensive list. It kind of varies from place to place, but even though the terminology varies, it always includes the same sort of items, and it's really a big help when you're trying to figure out what you should pack on a hike. Honestly, this is what I use when I go on both day hikes and backpacking trips. It's kind of like my beginnings on what I am trying to figure out if I should put it in my bag or not. Now, honestly, sometimes I overpack a little bit, probably too much, but I think that's better than the alternative, especially when it comes to really going out deep in the backcountry, like off-trail hiking, long distance hiking, that kind of thing. So before we dive in, I do want to say if you're just getting started hiking or backpacking or looking to take your hiking and backpacking to the next level, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every Monday and Thursday that go over tips from everything from the 10 essentials to getting started backpacking, how to stay safe, all sorts of different things. So be sure to subscribe, and otherwise, let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing that I do want to say is that there's like an old school list of the 10 essentials and there's like a new school list. So the old school list is much more like item specific, like bring matches, bring a compass, bring a map, bring this, bring that. Whereas the new list is much more like categories, which is a really good thing because obviously the items that you bring might vary depending on where you're going, the length of your trip, like what area you're hiking in, whether it's desert or like Alaska. There's going to be a pretty big difference there. So we'll kind of discuss some of those as we go through, but the first item on the list of 10 essentials is navigation. Of course, your standard map and compass. So I have this compass that I believe was probably like $25. I got it at through a class through the Colorado Mountain Club, so I'm not 100% honest, but it's very basic. It's set up so that way you can place it on a map to help you navigate, so that's important. And then I personally, when I'm hiking, like to use these National Geographic Trails Illustrated maps. I know they're not available for everywhere. Fortunately, they're pretty popular in Colorado and Alaska where I've lived, so it makes it easy, but you can also find maps online for wherever you're hiking, topo maps. And I do want to point that out. There's a difference between using a topo map and a map more like this, which is just a national parks map that I got at Denali National Park. Like those are still helpful too, and like the trailhead maps, but it is better to use a topo map. And you know, we can go all into the details and I won't here, but yeah, so map and compass, make sure that you not only have them, but you know how to use them. There's other things you can bring that would also go into that navigation category, and that would include like a personal locator beacon, some sort of GPS or like GPS app. So I use the Gaia app when I'm out in the field, especially for making my own routes, all those sorts of things. There's lots of different options, but you know, standard paper map and compass is usually the first thing on that list, and then you go from there. Okay, so item number 2 is a headlamp or some sort of light source. I personally always carry a headlamp. You know, mine's not fancy. I got this at Walmart for like $5, I think. You know, there's ones that you can recharge, which is preferable to battery power, but they tend to be more expensive. There's like ultralight, not ultralight options. There's tons out there. You could also maybe bring a flashlight, but really there's no need to double dip. Maybe you might want to consider carrying 2 headlamps. Like here in Alaska, it's super cold and it's dark so much that I have seen that on like backpacking trips, but that shouldn't be super necessary. The biggest thing is just make sure you have one and make sure that either you have extra batteries or a way to charge it and keep it charged. That way you don't end up coming down a hike that you're expecting it's going to be dark and then you get out your headlamp and then realize it's out of batteries and now you have to walk in the dark, because I've heard of that happening to multiple people. So that one's pretty obvious. Take some sort of light source. So the third essential item would be sun protection. So again, there's like a variety of things that fall in that category. One of which would be to carry sunscreen and make sure to use it. Yep, important, don't just carry it. You know, wearing like a floppy hat, sun glove, UV protection shirt. Personally, I like to carry my nice fancy ultralight umbrella. This is like one of my favorite gear items from this last year. So plenty there. You know, it's gonna depend again. Are you hiking here in Alaska in the winter when the sun barely shows its face? Or are you hiking in the desert in the middle of the summer? Like, there's a broad spectrum and it's going to really have an impact on what you carry for sun protection. But make sure you have something. Even in the winter, you know, the sun can bounce off the snow into your eyes and face and give you really terrible sunburn, like all those goggle burns you see people have. So the fourth essential is going to be your first aid kit. This is very important in my opinion. I carry like tons of extra ibuprofen because that's something that I know if I really got in a pickle I'd like to have, especially backpacking, and I really haven't had to use that much of it, but it's good to have, you know, gauze, all sorts of things. I have like a miniature, like a slimmed down first aid kit for trail running that I use that just has like one of everything that's super important, like tweezers and stuff, moleskin, that kind of thing. So this does include like foot care, so moleskin, as well as bug repellent if you're hiking somewhere with lots of bugs like mosquitoes or ticks. So this is one I would not skimp on, but on the other hand, I would say to make sure you know how to use what you have. So I do have in here somewhere like a little booklet that goes through, if I can find it, that goes through some basic first aid. Of course, you can also take like a wilderness first aid class is helpful. I also have a medical background, more with animals than with people, but you know, it's still applicable. I have had to use quite a few of these items, and I've given items like this away to other people. So, you know, it's just a good thing to have, especially if you're really going to go pretty far in the backcountry. You want to be able to take care of yourself. I'll say too, if you hike with dogs, I carry other dog-specific items like this foot care kit that also goes into my first aid kit that I carry with me. You know, they sell plenty of like built first aid kits at like REI, and then as you use stuff you can just restock it, and that's how I started out, and I just put it into a new bag. So first aid kit, super important. You know, make sure you can take care of yourself out there, and maybe consider taking a wilderness first aid class as well. Okay, essential number 5 would be gear repair and a knife. So I usually keep some sort of short knife in my pack. It's just nice to have, and honestly they're not that heavy if you just get a small one. I also always carry like tenacious tape with me, mostly to fix my tent, but you could use it to like fix a puppy or something else. There's other sorted items you can bring. It's probably a little over the top, but I usually carry paracord, and I've actually been happy to have it several different times just for like emergency bear hangs, but also like other random gear repairs. I've heard of people getting their packs chewed and stuff, like in the Weminuches in Colorado by like porcupines and marmots and stuff. So by having some of that stuff, even though it wouldn't be comfortable, it would at least make it easier to get out. So it doesn't have to include a lot, but that's just something to think about, is having some sort of gear repair. All right, so number 6 would be fire. Now you have some different options for this. I used to mostly just carry a lighter, and that works perfectly fine, but now I've actually switched to carrying flint, which is probably a little bit heavier, but it's more reliable as far as it's going to last a lot longer. I don't have to worry about fuel running out. You know, I can make a fire, I can use it for my stove, whatever. I just think it's super helpful. You can usually get like fire making emergency hiking kit things that include fire starter, flint, like other stuff like that. And that's where that flint came from, as it was a holiday gift one year. You can also maybe think about carrying a stove with you. So, you know, I'll take this a lot day hiking, especially in the winter, just because A, I like to bring good food to eat on my lunches, and B, it's just kind of a nice backup to know that I can melt snow or make a hot meal, or at least have hot water if I really get in a pickle. You know, especially when it's just super cold out. So that's another option too. Okay, and then continuing on that tangent of like first aid, gear repair, fire, all those types of things, is some sort of emergency shelter. A lot of times you'll see bivvies mentioned on that list. I don't know if that's absolutely necessary if you're just day hiking. Obviously, if you're backpacking, you should already have some sort of shelter, whether it's a tarp or a tent or a hammock. But for day hiking, I usually just rely on having a space blanket. A lot of times I'll carry some sort of like tent footprint, or maybe like a really lightweight tarp just to make some sort of shelter out of it, or maybe bringing like an extra quilt. This is pretty light. It's my dog quilt. Sometimes I'll take it on day hikes, especially like winter hikes, just as like a backup. But I also kind of think about what's around me, you know, like hiking in the woods, maybe have some sort of like lightweight handsaw, like those little ones like for cutting blowdowns and stuff. You could put that in your gear repair kit, and you could use that to cut branches and make some sort of shelter of your own, with a combination of like a footprint, tent footprint, and a space blanket to keep you warm. So you can be kind of creative and still keep it pretty light and compact, but just be thinking about like how you could shelter yourself depending on where you're hiking and like what the weather's like and that kind of thing. So that way, if you like twisted an ankle or something, you could get out of the elements while you wait for help, hopefully using, your PLB or knowing that you told someone where you're going, and it's just going to be a matter of time for them to find you. So say that does happen, you got injured and you're on the trail waiting for help. It's really nice to have an extra thing of food to eat. So this, again, doesn't have to be anything super crazy, but above and beyond your regular like lunch that you're bringing, you should have some sort of extra snack or meal. So usually when I'm backpacking, I just keep one extra meal more than what I planned. That way, if I get slowed down or it takes me longer than I think it will, I'll be okay. And I can tell you this has happened to me where I've run out of food basically on trail and it's not fun. So make sure you have a little bit of extra food. Day hiking, it's super easy to just carry some sort of like high calorie bar. So maybe taking like a green belly meal or like 1 or 2 extra Cliff Bars or just something so you have some extra backup energy. Even just like, these tuna packets are pretty lightweight, so maybe, and cheap too. They're super cheap. Maybe not that light, but they're super cheap. So you could pair this with like a green belly, and then, that would give you an extra 12 hours of energy if you really needed it in an emergency. And of course, depending on the weather, maybe like, here in the winter, I try to maybe take my stove and a Nors with me. That way, if I really had to get, wait somewhere, I could have a hot meal while I waited. And of course, if you're going to do something like take a Nors, then you really need water, and water is just so important. Like, you can go a really long time without food, but going without water, especially in the desert, is just, you're not going to last that long. Carrying some sort of water filter, I think, is very helpful. I mean, for water, they just say carry extra water, but I think it's a shame that more day hikers don't realize that like this is super cheap as far as it goes and super lightweight and easy to carry. It's just like taking a regular backpacking water filter with you, and then you never have to worry about water, especially if you're in a place that's very wet like Alaska where there's water everywhere. You can filter it without, feeling nervous that you're going to run out. For example, when I finished the San Luis Loop this summer and I was hiking into Durango, I met a gal that I don't know if she was just a day hiker with a trail running vest or what was going on, but she was out of water and obviously was very thirsty. In this section where there just wasn't a lot of water, and it's pretty dry coming into Durango. That was on the Colorado Trail, on the last section of the Colorado Trail. She didn't have any way to collect water, and she definitely had no idea about filtering. And of course, if it's really an emergency, just like drink the water first, because deal with that need first, and you can deal with Girardia later. But it's nice if you don't even have to worry about that. So having a filter is a good way to go. That doesn't help you if you're in the desert and there's no water out there at all. So you should also, make sure to carry more than you think you need, especially if you have dogs. It's really not a good time running out of water if you're trying to hike with your dogs in the desert. So keep those things in mind, but carrying some sort of water filter, maybe some sort of like platypus or something to store your water in is a big help too. Just always make sure to take regular water with you and then something above and beyond in case you need extra. Which brings me to the last item, and that is clothing. So above and beyond what you're wearing, you need some extra clothing. And I've talked about this before, but I look back and see pictures of me hiking on my first big hike, which was Grays and Torrey's Peak. And a lot of my hikes thereafter as well, where I was wearing just like shorts and a t-shirt and like cheap Walmart tennis shoes. And then the only jacket I had was just like one lightweight jacket, which is fine, but that was in fall in September, and it was great that the weather was nice, but you never know when a storm could come in, or if you get lost or injured or something and you have to stay the night. That would have been like super uncomfortable, especially in the fall. So, always make sure that there's like a couple different layers that you keep in your pack. This will kind of depend, I guess, on you, on what specific clothes you want. Mine are kind of frumpy probably, but they work well. And so I carry some sort of like base warmth layer usually. So, / moisture wicking layer. So like leggings for the bottom. In the winter, I'll carry like a long john type top. And then also all the time I wear something that's like a moisture wicking t-shirt. That way, if you sweat, you won't get chilled later. I usually carry like a fleece as a warm layer, or possibly a puffy as a warm layer, just depending on where you're hiking. And then also something that's waterproof and wind resistant. So rain pants is kind of like It's up to you on if you think it's necessary or not. It's just going to depend on where you're hiking once again. But you know, if in doubt, just take it with you, especially day hiking. It's like really just take it with you. And then of course like a rain jacket as well. The other thing too is I usually carry an extra pair of socks. That way if mine get wet and I have to spend the night, I have a dry pair of socks, and then some sort of gloves. So I have like shell gloves, and then like warmer gloves that go under it that aren't necessarily waterproof. So I wear those on top. So that's kind of like my system. And I keep it in a dry bag, but you really, I guess, don't necessarily have to do that depending on your backpack. But that's kind of like the clothing system I use. Every time I go on a hike, I make sure I have those things, plus or minus maybe the rain pants. And that just makes me feel a lot better. So the moral of the story really is to just think about all the situations you can get in. And I do this a lot. So I worked briefly as a zookeeper, and one of the things we did a lot, or we're told to do a lot, and I definitely did this, was to think about different situations that could happen on the job and what you would do in those situations. So think about like, what would happen if one of the rhinos got out? Like, what would you do in that situation? Would you run screaming? Would you call over the radio? Would you do this or that, or close this door or that door? What would you do? And the same goes, I think, for spending a lot of time in the wilderness and being prepared, is thinking about like, okay, I'm here hiking on this trail alone. If I stepped on that rock and rolled my ankle right now, what would I do in that situation? If my dog laid down and didn't want to get up, or broke her leg, how would I get my 60-pound German Shepherd out? You know, and that's not like a catch-all. Like, you know, you could think I'll do this or that and it might not work out. So sometimes it might be worth trying. Just to make sure it's going to work, and doing some research. But by thinking of those situations ahead of the time, when you end up in that situation, then you won't be taken unprepared. You will know what to do, you won't be panicked, and you can, you know, handle it with a level head. That way you don't make the situation worse. And so that's kind of where the 10 essentials really come in, is those are things that you should carry. That way, if something happens and you can't get out that day, and if you just spend a day in the forest, because sometimes it could take them a really long time to come get you, even if you're not that far from civilization, is how are you going to survive? How are you going to make sure that you don't get hypothermia, that something bad doesn't happen to you, that, you know, even if you're not as comfortable as you would be sitting on your couch, that you're not putting yourself in a super dangerous situation. So that's kind of where like the background of the 10 essentials. We've gone through the whole list, but I would highly encourage you to think critically about where you're hiking, what gear you need, what do you already have, what should you add to your list, and then kind of use that as a checklist every time you go out for something that's more than maybe like, you know, 1 to 2 hour walk close to home. Every time you're going either far out there or going for a bigger hike that's going to take a couple hours, make sure that you really have something from each of those categories to cover you, and make sure that you stay safe. And again, you know, you'll really have to kind of decide where you draw the line as far as when you bring all that stuff and when you don't. It can be sometimes be a little tricky for me, where it's like I feel like I'm overpacking because I have too much and I see all these people without stuff. But at the same time, again, there's been times where I've given stuff to people or helped them out because they haven't been prepared. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of just to get your cogs turning. But, you know, I'd love to know, like, what kind of stuff do you bring as part of your 10 essentials list? And then has there ever been a time when you've been out hiking and wished you had something and you didn't? So be sure to let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. And again, like, you know, put your Instagram, and I'd love to check out your pictures too. But other than that, you know, once again, if you want to see more tips, be sure to subscribe for videos on Mondays and Thursdays. And otherwise, that's all I got for today's video. So hope you guys have fun getting out there. Be sure to stay safe, because that's really all that matters at the end of the day. And that's why we do this, right? Is to have fun and stay safe. And otherwise, happy trails, and we'll see you later.